The night Vivian Cross told me to hold the elevator open while she finished her phone call, I held it for 4 minutes and 32 seconds. She stepped in without looking at me. The doors closed. She got off at the 41st floor and said one word as they shut again behind her. Lobby. I pressed the button and rode back down my station. That was a Tuesday in late February. The lobby of Meridian Tower was cold, near the revolving doors, the kind of cold that came through glass regardless of what the building's heating system believed about itself. I logged the time, 11:54 p.m., and went back to the camera feeds. 16 screens. I knew every angle, every blind spot. Which camera on the north corridor had a 3-degree drift the maintenance crew kept deferring, and which stairwell door on the parking level didn't fully seal unless you pulled it twice. My name is Marcus Webb. I was 41 years old. I was raising my daughter alone. I worked the overnight shift at Meridian 4 nights a week, sometimes 5, at $19.50 an hour, and I was, as far as anyone in that building was concerned, the man behind the desk. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Maya turned 7 in October. She had her mother's eyes, the kind that caught light from an angle, and she had my stubbornness, which she wore better than I ever did. She named everything. The plant by our kitchen window was Gerald. The crack in the ceiling above her bed was a river she had decided ran from the door to the closet. The stuffed elephant she had slept with since she was 18 months old was called Dr. Pemberton, because she had concluded at some point that elephants were probably doctors and that Dr. Pemberton specifically had a very busy practice. On school nights, she stayed with my neighbor Mrs. Fonseca, who was 72, retired from 30 years of nursing, and kept a collection of ceramic owls on every flat surface in her apartment. Mrs. Fonseca made arroz con leche that Maya called the best food in the known world, which I didn't dispute because I had tried it, and she was not wrong. I picked Maya up every morning at 7:15, after my shift ended at 6:30, after I had taken the train 4 stops and walked the 2 blocks home and changed out of my uniform. We ate breakfast together before school. That was the rule, mine and Maya's both. Breakfast at the table, no phones, and whoever made the coffee made it for 2, even if one of them was having warm milk. The morning routine was the part of the day that belonged to us. Everything else, I worked around it. Elena was killed in February 3 years before the events at Meridian, on an interstate highway outside Columbus during a night when the temperature dropped 12 degrees in 2 hours and the road crews hadn't reached that stretch yet. She had been driving back from a risk management conference. She called me from a rest stop 40 minutes before and said she was going to push through. I told her I would keep the coffee warm. After the funeral and the 4 months that followed, which I barely remember clearly, I made a decision. Maya was 4 years old. She needed a father who showed up in a way my previous life did not permit. So I gave notice at the position I had held for 6 years as Director of Security Operations at Caldwell Group, a private consulting firm that handled threat analysis and protective architecture for corporate clients across North America and Western Europe. The salary had been $340,000 a year. The work had been serious, and I had been good at it. I walked away from both without a great deal of ceremony. I found the apartment on Garfield Street, enrolled Maya in Riverside Elementary, and started looking for work that would let me be home by 7:30 each morning. Overnight security suited that. The pay was a fraction of what it had been. That part was fine. There was a photograph folded inside my locker at the Meridian security station. Maya, at the beach, 4 years old, arms stretched wide, running toward the water with her whole body, Elena visible at the edge of the frame. I had put it there on my first shift and not moved it in 11 months. Vivian Cross had moved into the penthouse at Meridian 14 months before I started the job. She was 34 and had been running Cross Capital Group, her family's private equity firm, since her father had a stroke 2 years prior that left him unable to continue. The firm managed roughly $3 billion in assets. Vivian had grown it by 18% in her first year at the helm. By any reasonable measure, she was very good at her work. She was also the kind of person who experienced lobbies as delays. She came through mine at irregular hours, always moving, always with a phone or a tablet or both, always carrying the particular energy of someone who was already 3 conversations ahead of the current one. She did not say good morning. She did not say good night. She said, hold the elevator and call me a car. And once on a night, I was not present to hear it, but the day guard relayed to me afterward with some discomfort. Is there anyone in this building capable of doing something useful? That last one came after a courier package arrived at noon and was held at the front desk per procedure instead of being sent upstairs unannounced. The day guard said she had seemed put out. I told him I was sure she would recover. I did not dislike Vivian Cross. I didn't have enough of her to dislike. What came through my lobby each night was armor all the way through, and I had known enough people who wore that kind to understand it was never the full picture. It was just the part they sent into rooms they didn't entirely trust. Most lobbies qualified. Daniel Osei worked the concierge desk during the day. He was 26, studying for his real estate license, and was the most systematically organized person I had ever shared a workplace with. He kept a small notebook with the preferences of every long-term resident written in a shorthand code only he could fully read. He had told me once that Ms. Cross never accepted food deliveries with broken seals, always requested the thermostat on 41 set to 68 degrees before midnight, and had not, in 2 years as a resident, acknowledged him by name. I told him I had noticed that pattern too. He said he had decided to treat it as data rather than a verdict. I said that was a solid approach. He said he had learned it from watching me. I had spent my first month at Meridian doing something no one asked me to do. I mapped the building's security architecture. Every gap I could find, every failure point, every assumption the previous contractor had built into the system that had never been pressure tested against an actual threat scenario. The parking level cameras had 2 blind corridors, each about 40 feet long, that an approach from the east would never capture. The service entrance on the north side had a badge reader that could be bypassed with a relay device available for $43 on a hardware site. The visitor log protocol had no identity verification layer, meaning anyone could sign in as anyone. I documented all of it in a 4-page memo and left it on the building manager's desk on a Thursday. He thanked me the following week and said he would pass it along to the security contractor. 3 months later, the parking cameras had been repositioned and the badge reader replaced. The visitor log remained unchanged. I noted that and moved on. Maya had started asking questions about my job the way 7-year-olds ask everything, which is without any awareness that the question might not have a clean answer. She asked me once whether I ever got scared working alone at night in a big empty building. I said that empty buildings didn't particularly frighten me. She asked what did then. I thought about it for a moment and said losing track of what mattered. She considered this with the seriousness she applied to things she sensed were important even when she couldn't fully decode them. Then she went back to her drawing. She was in a phase where every drawing showed a building with lit windows and a person standing outside, looking up. She said the person was always trying to decide whether to go in. I asked her once what made them decide. She said it depended on whether there was a light on somewhere inside that looked like it was meant for them. I kept that drawing on the refrigerator. By March, there were 11 drawings up there. Maya had a system for which one stayed and which came down. I was not entirely clear on the criteria. She said I would understand it eventually. The first time Vivian Cross spoke to me as though I was a person rather than an amenity was a Monday in March, and it happened by accident. She came through the revolving door at 2:17 in the morning, stopped in the center of the lobby, and stood there, not moving toward the elevator, not on her phone, just standing. I watched her for a moment on the camera feed, then looked over the desk directly. She had her coat on still, bag over one shoulder. She was looking at the lobby floor with the expression of someone who had arrived somewhere and was not entirely certain they had meant to. I said her name, not loudly, just enough to carry. She looked up. There was something in her face that was not the version she usually brought through that door. It was there for about 2 seconds before she collected it and put it back where she kept it. She said, "Is the elevator working?" I told her all elevators were operational. She said thank you. She walked to the elevator bank and was gone. I did not know yet what was coming. I did not know a name, Carter Vance, or what that name had been planning for the past 6 weeks. I did not know that a man who had lost $140 million in a cross-capital divestiture 18 months prior had spent the preceding weeks studying Vivian's schedule, her building, her car service, and the specific gaps in her security detail that his research had identified. What I did know was that Meridian's north camera had picked up the same gray sedan idling at the corner of the parking entrance for the third night running. Different time each night, a slightly different position along the curb, but always with a clean sight line to the building's main entrance. I logged it. Plate number, arrival times, parking position, the slight variation in angle that told me whoever was driving knew enough about camera coverage to keep adjusting. I wrote it in the overnight log with a star next to it and left a note for the building manager flagging it as a pattern worth reviewing. Nobody asked me about it. I went back to the camera feeds and I waited. On the fourth night, I logged the sedan. I ran the plate myself. I had access to the building's visitor and incident management system, which was connected through the property management company to a shared security database used by about 60 commercial buildings in the city. It was not a law enforcement tool. It was a corporate watch list, flagged vehicles, flagged individuals, prior incident record from partner properties. I had been trained on it at my previous job, where we had used a version 3 times more sophisticated. The Meridian terminal was slower and its search parameters were narrower, but it returned what I needed. The plate belonged to a vehicle registered to a Shell LLC incorporated in Delaware 14 months ago. The LLC had no active business filings, no employees on record, no physical address beyond a registered agent mailbox in Wilmington. The registration had been updated 3 weeks prior. I sat with that for a while. Then I pulled the Cross Capital Group press releases from the past 2 years, which are public record and available through the building's internet terminal. 18 months back, Cross Capital had completed the divestiture of a manufacturing portfolio company called Vance Industrial Solutions. The transaction had been contentious. The founder and majority shareholder, a man named Carter Vance, had challenged the sale terms in arbitration and lost. His total loss on the forced buyout after legal fees had been reported in a trade publication as approximately $140 million. Carter Vance, 51 years old, based in Phoenix. He had not made public statements since the arbitration concluded. His LinkedIn profile had gone dark around the same time. I printed the trade article and the vehicle registration return. I put them in a folder and wrote a cover memo addressed to Raymond Holt, who was Vivian Cross's personal security director and had been for 3 years. Raymond was ex-law enforcement, Chicago PD, for 11 years before moving into private work. He was competent in the way that people are competent when their environment has never seriously tested them. He came through the lobby most mornings around 8, acknowledged me occasionally with a nod that meant nothing in particular, and had the unhurried manner of a man who considered himself the most qualified person in any room he entered. I left the folder at the front desk with a note asking him to call me. He did not call. 3 days later, I saw him in the lobby when I arrived for my shift, and I stopped him directly. I told him about the sedan, the pattern, the plate, the registration, and Carter Vance. I had the folder with me and offered it to him. He took it, opened it, looked at the first page for about 4 seconds, and closed it again. He said that surveillance detection was outside the scope of a lobby guard's responsibilities. He said it without heat, the way people say things they consider to be simply true. He said that Ms. Cross had a full security protocol managed by his team, and that if there were credible threats to her safety, those would be identified and addressed through appropriate channels. I said the appropriate channel was what I was standing in front of him trying to use. He said he appreciated my diligence. He handed the folder back. I took it and said nothing else. I went to my station and logged the conversation in the overnight record the way I logged everything, with a time and a description precise enough to be useful later. The week after that was a Wednesday, and Vivian Cross came through the lobby at 11:40 with 2 men in expensive suits who were speaking the language of a deal that had not yet closed. They were laughing. All 3 of them had the energy of people who had eaten well and were still inside the momentum of a good evening. Vivian was bright in a way I had not seen before from across a lobby. Whatever she was normally carrying when she came home at midnight, she had set it down somewhere at the restaurant. She stopped at the desk and asked me to have a car ready for her guests at 6:30 the following morning. I said I would arrange it with the concierge for the morning shift. She said fine, and then one of the men, the taller one with a pocket square the same color as his tie, looked at me the way people look at objects they are classifying, and asked Vivian whether the building provided this level of staffing around the clock or only during business hours. Vivian said the overnight shift was standard for a building this size, that covered basic access management and package receipt, though she added with the particular lightness of someone making a small joke at no one's expense that she had once waited 4 minutes for an elevator while the night guard tried to locate the lobby button. The two men laughed. Not loudly, just enough. I processed the car request. I wrote down the time and the guest suite numbers. I said good evening. Nobody responded. I had been looked at that way before. Not in this building and not in this uniform, but I knew the look. In the military, before I left, there had been a general, 2 stars conventional army, assigned as a liaison to our unit for a joint evaluation exercise, who had walked into our operations room and looked at the men around the table with exactly that quality of vision. The kind that adds up what it sees and assigns a value based on what's recognizable. What he did not see, because he did not know what to look for, was that the man on his left had run 17 consecutive successful extraction operations across 4 countries without a single casualty. He saw a rank. He ran an evaluation. He filed his report. He left. I thought about that general sometimes when I sat at the Meridian desk at 2 in the morning. I did not think about him with bitterness, which would have been a waste of energy I needed for other things. I thought about him the way you think about a weather pattern. It comes through. It does what it does. The structure underneath holds. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. That Thursday was a school holiday, and Maya came to work with me. This was not a regular arrangement. The staffing company would not have approved it, and I had not asked. But Maya's school had a professional development day, and Mrs. Fonseca had a medical appointment she could not reschedule, and my options were limited. I brought Maya in at 11 p.m. Wearing her pajamas under her coat, carrying Dr. Pemberton and a backpack with her drawing supplies and a thermos of warm milk Mrs. Fonseca had packed. I set her up on the couch in the break room at the back of the security station with a blanket and the small lamp from the supply cabinet, and told her she could draw until she fell asleep. She did not fall asleep until 1:30. She sat in the break room with the door open a crack and drew, and every 40 minutes or so, she came out to the desk to show me progress. The first drawing was of the lobby, as she imagined it looked from above, all the marble squares and the round reception desk, and a tiny figure at the center of it, she said was me. I asked how she knew it was me. She said because the figure was standing very still and looking at everything. The second drawing was of a man standing in front of a door that was locked. She colored the door red. She said she hadn't decided yet whether it would open. At 1:15, she brought out the third drawing and set it on the desk in front of me without commentary. It was the lobby again, but this time there were 2 figures, one behind the desk and one near the elevator. Between them, she had drawn a thin yellow line she said was light. She said sometimes you couldn't see what was connecting 2 people until after something happened. I folded that drawing and put it in my shirt pocket. She fell asleep on the break room couch at 1:30 with Dr. Pemberton pressed against her cheek. I checked on her every 20 minutes. At 2:40, she murmured something in her sleep that I couldn't make out and then settled. At 2:53, the Gray Sedan appeared on camera. This time it had pulled into the parking structure. Not the street, not the curb approach. The parking structure, using a temporary visitor pass that the visitor log showed had been generated that afternoon by an unverified identity field, the same vulnerability I had documented in my memo 4 months prior. I watched the sedan on camera 12. It parked on level 2, far corner, backed into the space. The engine cut. Nobody got out. I called Raymond Holt's emergency line. It rang 6 times and went to voicemail. I called the building manager's after-hours number. He picked up on the 4th ring, groggy, and I explained what I was seeing. He said it was probably a resident who had lost their regular pass and used the visitor system. He said to make note of it, and he would look into it in the morning. I said I understood. I logged the call. Then I walked to the break room and checked that Maya was still asleep. She was. Dr. Pemberton had shifted to face the wall. I straightened the blanket at her feet and went back to the desk. I pulled up the parking structure cameras on a second monitor and watched level 2. The sedan sat there in the dark corner of the frame. Engine off, nobody entering or exiting. Whoever was inside was patient. That was the most important piece of data I had about Carter Vance so far. He was not impulsive. He had been planning this for weeks, and he was willing to sit in a parking structure in the cold and wait for a time that suited him. Patient people were the ones who were actually dangerous. I opened the building schematics on the desk terminal, the same ones I had studied during my first month. The parking structure connected to the building's internal service corridor on level 2 through a maintenance access door. That door used a standard keycard system. Carter Vance had a visitor pass that had already gotten him past the entrance barrier. Whether the pass would work on interior doors depended on how the access permissions had been configured. I already knew how they had been configured. I had documented it in the same memo Raymond Holt had handed back to me. The visitor pass granted access to all common areas, including service corridors below level 5. I picked up the phone and called the police non-emergency line. I gave them my name, the building address, the vehicle description, the plate, and Carter Vance's name. I told them there was a vehicle in the parking structure belonging to an individual with potential motive to harm a resident of the building, and that the vehicle had entered using a spoofed visitor credential. I was calm and specific. I gave them the arbitration case reference number from the trade article I had printed. The dispatcher said someone would follow up. I asked for an estimated time. She said that depended on current call volume. I thanked her and hung up. I checked the camera on level 2. The sedan had not moved. At 3:41, it did. The sedan backed out of the space slowly, no headlights, using only the dim amber of the parking structure's emergency strip lighting. It moved toward the far end of the level and stopped again near the maintenance access corridor. On camera, I could see the driver's door open. A figure stepped out. Male, medium height, wearing dark clothing and carrying something low and close to his body that the camera's resolution could not fully define. He walked to the maintenance corridor door and held his visitor pass to the reader. The light turned green. He went through. I stood up from the desk. I had not planned the next steps in sequence. I did not have time for sequence. What I had was 11 years of training, 6 years of professional threat response, and a specific knowledge of every corridor in that building that no one else in it possessed at this particular moment. I also had my daughter asleep in the break room. I went to the break room, closed the door gently, and propped a chair under the handle the way you do when you want the room to hold. Then I took the elevator to parking level 2. The maintenance corridor on level 2 ran north for 60 feet before intersecting with the service shaft that fed the building's upper residential floors. There were 2 routes from that intersection to the occupied floors: the service elevator, which required a staff key card, and the emergency stairwell, which did not. I had flagged both of those access points in my memo. I moved through the corridor without turning on the overhead lights, using the floor-level emergency strips the same way he was. I had done this kind of work in the dark before, in places with considerably less emergency lighting and considerably higher stakes. My hands were steady. My breathing was even. I heard him before I saw him, a slight sound of movement near the stairwell door at the end of the north run, the specific quality of weight shifting on concrete in a space where sound travels flat and close. I stopped. He stopped. The corridor was quiet. Then I said, clearly and without volume, "Building security. Identify yourself and step away from the door." There was a pause that lasted about 2 seconds. Carter Vance said, "You're a lobby guard." He said it the way people say things when they're trying to establish what they are dealing with, and the answer is reassuring to them. A lobby guard. Something to move around. I said, "Step away from the door." He did not. What happened in the next 40 seconds I will describe as plainly as I can, because the plain version is the true one. Carter Vance moved first. He came off the stairwell door toward me fast, and whatever he was carrying, he raised with his right hand. I stepped left, inside his reach, and redirected his arm at the wrist. He was bigger than me and had the momentum of someone who had committed fully to the motion. That commitment was the problem for him. When you give everything to a single movement and it finds no resistance where it expected resistance, the body has nothing left to correct with. I controlled his wrist, brought his arm across his own center, and took him to the floor, in one continuous motion. He went down hard on his shoulder. I held the position. He stopped moving. The whole thing took less time than it takes to describe it. I kept my knee on the floor beside him, his arm locked, and I said again that he should stay still. This time he did. He was breathing in the ragged way of someone who has just understood that the situation is not what they planned for it to be. Whatever he'd been carrying had skidded across the concrete when he went down. I could see it from where I was. A knife, folding blade, handle up. I stayed where I was and waited for the police. They arrived 9 minutes later. 2 officers, then a third. They came through the parking entrance the way I had told the dispatcher they should, and I called out to them from the corridor so they could follow my voice. When they came through the maintenance door and turned on the overhead lights, they found Carter Vance on the floor with his hands zip-tied behind his back using the restraints I kept on my belt as standard equipment, a habit from a previous life that I had never bothered to change. One of the officers looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked at Vance, then back at me. He said, "You're the lobby guard?" I said yes. He crouched down beside Vance and began the process of taking over the scene. The second officer walked the corridor. The third came to me with a notepad and started asking questions. I answered all of them in order with times and specific details, and I gave him the folder I had brought from the desk, the plate registration, the Carter Vance trade article, the log entries going back 4 weeks, Raymond Holt's name, and the date. I had tried to hand him the same information. The officer read the folder without rushing. He looked up once, studied my face, and went back to reading. Raymond Holt arrived 20 minutes after the police. He came through the parking entrance in street clothes, hair not entirely in order, phone already at his ear. He stopped when he saw the scene, the lights, the officers, Carter Vance being walked toward the entrance in handcuffs. His eyes found me standing at the edge of the corridor with the notepad officer. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, "How did you?" I said I had documented the access vulnerability in a memo to the building manager 4 months ago. I said the visitor pass system had not been corrected. I said Carter Vance had walked through the gap I had flagged, and I had been watching the cameras when he did. Raymond looked at the folder in the officer's hand. He recognized it. He had held it himself and handed it back. He did not apologize. He did not have words for it yet. What he did was step back slightly, the way people step back when they are recalibrating something they thought they already understood. Vivian Cross came down at 4:15. Nobody had called her. Raymond had made the decision to let her sleep and brief her in the morning. But the police presence in a building generates a particular quality of disruption that travels through walls and elevator shafts. And she had woken up and come down herself, still in a coat pulled over her clothes, hair not arranged, looking like the person she was before the day's armor went on. She stepped out of the elevator and saw the officers. She saw Raymond. She saw me standing at the desk where I always stood, writing the incident log by hand the way I did every night, in the same chair, under the same light. She looked at Raymond and said, "What happened?" He told her. He told her about Carter Vance and the arbitration and the 40-week gap between the divestiture and that night. He told her about the parking structure, the visitor pass, the maintenance corridor. He told her that her overnight lobby guard had identified the threat 4 weeks earlier, documented it twice, and when no one acted on his documentation, had handled it himself in a parking corridor at 4 in the morning while his daughter slept in the break room. Vivian was very still through all of it. One of the detectives who had arrived with the second response unit was a man named David Okafor. He was 46, had worked financial crime and threat investigations for 12 years, and before that had spent 8 years as a consultant with a corporate security firm in Chicago. He walked over to where I was writing the log, looked at me for a second, and said my name in the particular way of someone checking a memory. I looked up. He said, "Marcus Webb, Caldwell Group." I said yes. He said he had worked a case with Caldwell's threat analysis team 8 years ago, a kidnapping risk assessment for a pharmaceutical executive. He remembered the lead analyst, the one who had written the threat model that the FBI had later used as a framework for 2 subsequent cases. He said, "That was you." I said it was. He looked at me the way David Okafor looked at things, carefully and without drama. Then he said to Vivian, who was standing close enough to hear all of it, that the man she employed as her overnight lobby guard had previously run threat intelligence operations for clients across North America and Western Europe and had been, at the time he left Caldwell Group, one of the most respected protective architects in the private sector. Vivian said nothing. David said, "He handed your security director a folder with everything in it a month ago." Raymond, to his credit, did not look away. Vivian looked at me then, not the way she looked at me when she wanted the elevator held or a car called. She looked at me the way she had looked at the lobby floor at 217 on that Monday in March, when she had come through the door, carrying something she hadn't put down yet and forgotten, for just a moment, to keep it out of her face. She said, "Your daughter is here." I said she was asleep in the break room. She said, "Is she all right?" I said she was fine. I had checked on her twice since coming back up from the corridor. Vivian nodded. She looked at the lobby around her, the desk, the cameras, the 16 screens, the folded notepad, the chair that held the overnight shift the same way every night regardless of who saw it or thanked it. She looked at it the way you look at a room when you realize you have been in it many times without actually seeing it. She came to find me the following Thursday morning, not during a crossing of paths, not while she was on her way somewhere else. She came specifically. She arrived at the front desk at 7:10, which was 20 minutes before my shift ended, and she waited until Daniel arrived at 7:30, and I was free to step away. We stood near the revolving doors. The city outside was doing what it does early on a Thursday, the quiet part before the volume comes up. She said she owed me a specific apology for a specific thing. She said the elevator comment, the one she had made in front of her guests, the one about the lobby button, had been careless in a way she was not going to dress up as anything else. She said it had been the kind of carelessness that assumed a person was not present enough to be affected by it. I said I appreciated her saying so. She asked about Maya. I told her about the drawings, the buildings with lights in the windows, the person outside deciding whether to go in. I told her what Maya had said about the yellow line between the two figures, about how sometimes you couldn't see what was connecting people until after something happened. Vivian was quiet for a moment. Then she said that was a very clear-eyed thing for a 7-year-old to understand. I said Maya was generally ahead of schedule on that kind of thing. 3 weeks later, Vivian Cross had the building's visitor log protocol rebuilt with a verified identity layer. She funded it directly outside the property management budget and had Raymond Holt oversee the implementation using specifications I wrote out on 2 pages of standard paper at the security desk on a Tuesday night. She also had the service corridor access permissions restructured so that no visitor pass could reach the residential floors without a second authentication. Both changes went into effect before the end of the month. She did not offer me a different job. She did not make a gesture I hadn't asked for. What she did was fix the things that had needed fixing and make sure my name was on the documentation that said who identified them. That was enough. More than enough. Actually, the morning after the specifications were approved, I picked Maya up from Mrs. Fonseca's at 7:15. She was still in her pajamas and carrying Dr. Pemberton by one ear, and she asked me on the walk home whether anything interesting had happened at work lately. I said a few things had sorted themselves out. She said that was good. She said sometimes things just needed more time than you thought they would. We stopped at the corner where the bakery opens at 7, and they had the kind of bread Maya liked in the window. I bought 1 loaf. We walked the rest of the way home in the early light with the bread warm through the bag, and she told me about a drawing she was planning. A building, she said, but this time all the doors were already open and the person outside wasn't deciding anymore. They were going in. I asked her how the drawing ended. She said she hadn't finished it yet, but she thought it ended with the lights on. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.